Hello, dear colleagues and friends, and welcome to the National Swedish Museums of Defense and Military History and the conference Challenges and Opportunities of War Museums in Time of Armed Conflict. My name is Stålebro. I am head of Department Collection at the Air Force Museum in Linköping, where we will spend day 2 and 3 of this conference, and I will be your host here for the next coming days, along with some of my colleagues here. We would like to extend a special welcome to our friends and colleagues from Ukraine, who every day fight for their freedom, the freedom of Europe, and the protection of cultural heritage. And I think they deserve the first round of applause of the day. We hope that this conference will engage in interesting conversations and discussions, be a place for learning, but maybe the most important thing, to establish new networks with each other between museums and colleagues. Before we start, I would like to inform you with some information of practicalities. In the unlikely events of an emergency, we have to use the exit in the back or in the front. And I will wear a green vest so you can all follow me out and I'll guide you safely. We will reassemble at the yard by the big tank, and we cannot use the elevators. There are restrooms adjacent from where we are now, behind those doors, and if you need to open them, just use the black button to open the doors. And you can also store your luggage there when we have our walk and talk later on. We will have coffee and lunch in the room behind those doors, so we don't need to move very far. And I think that's it. So I would like to welcome the first speaker of today, our Director General, Helene Rånlund, to the stage. Welcome, Helene.
Thank you, Per, and thank you all for being here. A warm welcome to all of you. This is tradition for the Nordic museums of military history, war museum, to meet every year, actually, in Denmark, Finland, Norway, and Sweden. And this, the tradition disappeared some years ago, and then we had also COVID time. And I think one time when we were in Helsinki, we also had colleagues from Estonia, actually. But since we are in a new situation since a couple of years back, I have been thinking a lot about how can we gather and be strong together as museums within this field. Being a war museum or defense museum is a little bit different than being a museum when it is when it is armed conflict times. This is a challenge in different ways, and we have faced that here. How do we deal with the contemporary situation? New history is written every day. Our exhibitions, especially here in Sweden, perhaps, since we have been in peace since 200 years back, is also stories that are perhaps a bit distant in the reflections. And we have struggled with this since a couple of years back. We've also tried to make exhibitions. We've also had a lot of contact with colleagues in Ukraine, but also in the Baltic countries, because a lot of hands were stretched out to Ukrainian colleagues when the full-scale invasion started in 2022 in February. And it's been important to support our colleagues, but also to reflect upon how do we tell about this kind of history in these times. How do we do this? And this is the main purpose of this conference, challenges, but also opportunities, because this kind of history it has many levels. It is on society level, but it's also very, very connected to each of us. It affects all of us individually. With that comes a big responsibility with our kind of museums to tell with dignity, but also about reality. We can tell about the techniques, the different kinds of weapons. We can tell about changes in policies, etc. But we also have to tell about the consequences. And during this conference, we will have possibility to have keynote speakers who will also talk about what this information or disinformation also plays a big role in what we do. Museums are seen, at least we have found out here in Sweden after different investigations that museums are seen as a very credible institution. In all fields, people rely on museums to tell the true history, the facts, based upon artifacts, based upon stories that have been collected. But of course, it's always a selection. And with that comes also a big responsibility to select what is important now and how can we also highlight the need of preserving but also develop the history during these special times that we now are facing. The world order changes. And with that comes challenges, but also opportunities. And I hope that these coming days will create a good discussion after listening to different keynotes. We in Sweden are also facing changes, and you will hear about that in the museum structure, but also in developing our museums and exhibitions. And I know many of you also work with this. And I hope we have some colleagues that couldn't be here, but we've gathered the Northern European museums within this field. Unfortunately, they couldn't attend from Latvia and Lithuania and Netherlands. And we also invited UK. And they are very sorry not to be here, but we will hopefully have possibility to share our conclusions from these days also with them. And I hope this will be a start for network to grow within this field. And I think now I will have some minutes for Fabian. Where are you? I want to say I'm so happy to see you here. And some of you are old friends and some of you are new faces you have never met before. We will have this in English, but I hope it will be possible to follow, and for Ukrainian colleagues that we have also possibility for that you can share information, because we have not possibility to have translation during this time. And we are in a special place, Fabian. We are actually in something historical. So I give the word to Fabian Arnheim, Museum Director of Army Museum, National Army Museum in Stockholm. Thank you for being here, and all the best for these days.
So these days we're gathered to talk about military history. And you're sitting in it right now. You're not only in the National Army Museum, but also in the historic artillery arsenal. So originally built for storage of the artillery in the 17th century, during the so-called Swedish Great Power Area, when Sweden was at its largest geographically. The buildings of today originate from the 18th century. So picturing this conference some 200 years ago, you would arrive by boat, and one of the most dominating buildings you would have seen would have been this one. The Artillery Museum opened in 1879, and the National Army Museum was founded in the 1930s. So today, Army Museum consists of about 5,000 square meters exhibition space. We have about 100,000 items and around 60,000 visitors per year, and 30 employees in the permanent staff. So embrace the history and let's make a new one together.
Thank you so much, Fabian and Helene. It's soon time for our first keynote speaker of the day, but before that I would like to say welcome to our online viewers, because we are broadcasting this session right now. So we have viewers following us online, and they will be able to listen to our two first keynote speakers of the conference, but they are unfortunately not able to ask any questions, so we have to do our best here in the room instead. But now I'd like to welcome our first keynote speaker of this conference, Dr. Magnus Hjort, Director General of the Swedish Psychological Defense Agency and member of the Royal Swedish Academy of War Science, will give a presentation about the importance of history and history museums, Russia's rewriting of history for propaganda and disinformation purposes. Welcome, Magnus.
Thank you. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. I wish to express my thanks to you, Helene, for inviting me to speak about this subject, which I have touched upon before but never given a full speech about, but this is something that really touches me, the importance of history and how history is used and abused in modern conflicts. But first, a few words about the agency, which I am Director General of. We are a civil defense agency under the Swedish government. We are sorted under the Ministry of Defense. And we were established 3.5 years ago. We are around 80 employees. We have office premises in Karlstad, that's 300 kilometers to the west from here, and in Solna, slightly north from here. Psychological defense, that may sound like a peculiar concept for many of our international participants here. Sweden has had psychological defense since the 1950s. So it was a concept actually developed during World War II, actually. A Swedish scholar was traveling around Sweden and giving speeches saying that psychological defense is just as important as airplanes. We need psychological defense to protect our people from the propaganda that we could see from the warfaring nations during World War II. So now we have revitalized this because of the current threat situation, and it's developed for today's threats and tomorrow's, actually, of course. So today we define it as society's collective ability to resist foreign malign information influence targeting Sweden or Swedish interests. And it's the collective ability of society. So we are all part of Swedish psychological defense, actually. Psychological defense is not just the task of this agency, it's the task of the whole of our society, actually. And in war, we need to stay even stronger and resisting an adversary's attempts to break down our will to defend, our will to fight, actually, because that is what will happen in a war, that we know for sure. So, the purpose of psychological defense. When I wrote the report to the Swedish government a few years back, I wanted to stress why we need a psychological defense and what's the purpose of psychological defense. And we came up with this concept: safeguard the open and democratic society, the free formation of opinion, and Sweden's freedom and independence. And this is something that we stick to. We are always on the side of freedom, independence, freedom of speech, freedom of expression. That's what we are safeguarding, our democracy. So, what do we do then? Well, one of our remits from the Swedish government is to build long-term resilience within the whole Swedish society. We collaborate with local, regional and national government agencies. We work with civil society. We work with museums, libraries, in order to enhance preparedness, knowledge about what is going on outside Sweden. How are authoritarian regimes using information as a weapon against us? How is the modern information landscape evolving? What does AI mean for an adversary's work in attacking us in the information domain, etc. And we fund research, we have exercises, training courses for all kinds of groups in Sweden, but also abroad. We do a lot of work in Ukraine, for instance. And we, of course, we also monitor what foreign threat actors are doing towards Sweden or Swedish interests. And that is something we are sharing with the Swedish government and government agencies who are in need of a threat assessment in this area, of course. So we report to the government offices on a weekly basis, but also monthly to our cabinet minister, Carl-Oskar Bolin. And we also must prepare Swedish psychological defense for a wartime situation. So we need to build a war organization like any other Swedish government agency these days. And in case of danger of war or war in Sweden, we have an additional remit from the Swedish government. And that is to be able to suggest to the Swedish government measures that could be undertaken to prevent an attacker, reduce an attacker's ability or intention to attack Sweden in the information arena. I call this the offensive dimension of psychological defense, where we could be using our psychological defense towards an enemy who is attacking us. But this is only to be used in war or danger of war, and it's a tool that the Swedish government has in their toolbox. We are only the agency who could suggest different measures to the Swedish government. So you could say we have an expert task here to provide the Swedish government with options. And of course, we are learning a great deal from what Ukraine is doing in this field. We have had a lot of work together with Ukrainian government agencies and civil society in Ukraine. We have training courses, we have exercises, and we get a lot of information in return. What is actually working when you're in an information war? Is anything working really? Can you reach the Russian population in any way? Can you reach Russia's decision makers? I would say it's extremely difficult, but that is something we need to look into, of course. And in the European Union, it's called FIMI, Foreign Information Manipulation and Interference. And that's a concept that was developed a few years back, saying it needs to be foreign. We never look into what's in the Swedish information domain. That's protected by freedom of speech. You have the right to be wrong. Often you have the right to lie. You have the right to be pro-Russian if you want to. What we are looking into is what foreign entities are doing towards Sweden. And it's no secret that Russia is what we are mainly looking at, but of course also China, Iran, and other possible countries that are attacking Sweden or Swedish interests. So FIMI is always directed from outside towards Sweden. It aims to harm us. And it's a broader term than disinformation. It's not only disinformation, it's narratives that could be partially true. It could be have an angle that distorts things. It could be value-based, trying to say something about us. And values are, normally neither true nor false. So that's why we think FIMI is a good concept. It's broader than disinformation, but many call it disinformation. It's a simple term to remember. So many of these things are disinformation, a lot of it's propaganda, it's all FIMI. And it can be hidden, it can have false senders, or it could be completely open, coming from the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, for instance. Or it could be coming from the president giving a speech. So it's different sources, actually. And I want to stress that we exist because information is being used as a weapon in preparation for war, during wars, and in peacetime. Sweden is not at war presently. And this is something that is used to scare us, to polarize our societies, to change the way we perceive reality, to change our opinions. And going back a bit, a few years, the Swedish government said that we are now in the most difficult security situation since World War II. And going back to January this year, the Swedish Prime Minister gave a speech at the annual conference People and Defense in Sälen in northern Sweden, saying that Sweden is not at war, but there is no peace either. And this is an interesting way of describing the situation we're in right now. We're not at war, but there's also not peace. So think of that for a while. I mean, what does it say? What does it mean? And what's the message for us as a government agency, us as a people, to describe the situation like this? We're not at peace. And how should we handle the current threat situation? And this is the situation that we are in, actually, as a government agency, to handle a situation where this is not peace. We need to deal with, there is an information war going on. So, moving on to today's topic. Does history matter in today's conflicts? What do you say? Yeah, well, I think that's a given. To have a better understanding of the present and look into the future, we need to turn to history. Who said that? Who wrote that? Any guesses? No one? No, not Churchill. Not Churchill. This guy. In his very well-known speech on the historical unity of Russians and Ukrainians. Well, I mean, you've all heard of this speech, and maybe some of you have read it. It's very interesting. And to me, it sounds quite a bit like something coming from this book. Namely this: who controls the past, controls the future. Who controls the present, controls the past. And this captures, I would say, a lot of what is going on now within the Kremlin. That by controlling the past, you can predict or shape the future. And that is, that's one of my main arguments. That is what they are trying to do, actually. So, moving on. History as a battlefield. I would say, yes, history has become a battlefield. Maybe it has been a battlefield before, always maybe. But today it's very obvious, like from this tweet here. Consistent efforts to preserve historical memory and combat the glorification of Nazism must remain a vital international priority. Russia will continue its effort against the revision of World War II results and its battle against neo-Nazism. And this is something that Russia comes back to all the time. World War II, the events leading up to World War II, and also the events during World War II. And neo-Nazism, as you will see, comes back all the time. Also, in these posters that were posted outside the Swedish embassy a few years back, saying that several Swedes were actually Nazis. So, well, we were Nazis as well. Astrid Lindgren, she was a Nazi according to this. And you can argue, or we did in Sweden, we questioned, why are they doing this? Who are they? What do they want? And the question remains, I would say, this was obviously something that came from a Kremlin-directed operative. Some kind of NGO has taken the credit here. Doesn't matter really. It was posted outside the Swedish embassy, which says to me that they wanted us to notice it, and it was noticed. For a week, we talked about this in Sweden, asking ourselves, why do they do this? I mean, no one in Sweden believes that Astrid Lindgren was a Nazi. I mean, she was not. But they keep coming back to this. So, what is this then? Well, you all recognize this guy, Stalin. Is this an old sculpture, do you think? Is this old stuff? No. Sorry? No, this is from a tube station, in a metro station in Moscow. This was done in May this year. So they are now reinstating sculptures of Stalin in the Moscow tube stations. And it gives a signal to Russians traveling every day that this must have been a great guy after all. I mean, he had some faults. He did some wrong things. Repression of the people, yeah, well, these were tough times. He was a great leader, wasn't he? He had a great empire. Shouldn't we get that back? Isn't, the Soviet Union worthy of reinstating also, if we are reinstating the leader? And of course, you can see above his head is Lenin. Putin doesn't like Lenin. Lenin planted the time bomb in the constitution of the Soviet Union, making it possible for different states to break out of the Union. So this is something that Putin comes back to. Lenin planted a time bomb in the constitution. It's all Lenin's fault. Stalin was pretty good. He did some bad things, but Lenin was not good, according to Putin. Moving on, we can go further back in history to see how this battle is fought today. The Great Northern War, 1700 to 1721. And of course, the Battle of Poltava, 1709. Most of you have, I think, heard of this battle. Many Swedes has not. It's all but forgotten in Sweden. I don't know why, actually, because it's quite interesting. And a few months back, we saw these notices. We fought Sweden for 21 years. We can fight Ukraine for as long as it takes. And this was the chief negotiator in the Istanbul talks, Medinsky, who said this, as a way of saying that we can fight this war as long as it takes, because we fought them damned Swedes for 21 years, and we won. And this is something they keep coming back to in different ways. Like in this talk here, he explains at great length how this was very important for Russia. But for Western ears, this is kind of disturbing and different. It's difficult to understand why it keeps coming back to history, like Russia is doing. So Russia was criticized by this guy, Mark Rutte, who was saying that, well, why do they send a historian to give us a speech about Russian history since 1250? What's the idea of this? This is not serious. But for Russia's point of view, it is serious because they are building a logic around history. So, of course, Russia reacts and replies, and calling Rutte's remarks for nonsense. And this lady, you may have seen, Maria Zakharova, spokesperson for the Russian MFA. And it's number 2 here who is most interesting. Without an understanding of the historical context, no issue can be resolved. The ignorance displayed by NATO officials has already resulted in countless casualties across the globe. So she's actually saying that it's our fault for not, knowing history and accepting history and what history brings for the future that causes different conflicts, and especially the conflict that Russia started in 2014 against Ukraine. And Russia loves the Battle of Poltava, and TASS, the Russian news agency as well. They love it so much they have built an entire website around this battle. And I think it's pretty accurate, actually. I mean, I'm not an expert on warfare in the 1700s, but it looks pretty accurate. And we lost that war. Russia won it. No debate about that. It's just that we don't care. I mean, it's 300 years ago. We don't care about that. The Russians do. So every year, the Russian embassies all over the world, I think, are celebrating this battle. Here's a tweet from Russian embassy in USA. Here's one from Indonesia. I'm sure the Indonesians want to hear all about this battle. And the people of Botswana as well. They love to hear about the Battle of Poltava. South Africa as well. And I could go on, you know, you get the picture. This is something that Russia is really wanting to put out there for everyone to know. They won this battle. Yeah, they did. We don't care. This battle comes up all the time, actually. The dream of war, Pushko reminded the Swedes about Poltava. Why did he do that? Let's go back 1 year. This is 9 January 2024. In direct conjunction with the People and Defense conference in Sweden, where the Minister of Civil Defense, Carl-Oskar Bolin, and the Supreme Commander was saying, Sweden could also be in a war. We need to be prepared. And this was a response from Russia. Well, we are dreaming of Poltava again. We have never forgotten Russia for Poltava. And it's interesting because this is evidence that Russia do not understand Sweden because we do not care about Poltava. We care about the present and the future. Poltava, that was 300 years ago. It doesn't affect us at all. But they think that this can be used towards us. But also, of course, to bring glory for Russia, for their own people. And in Indonesia and Botswana, as you saw. This is another example. Later, same year, this woman was used in a false tweet saying that Swedes had died in Poltava. Poltava was attacked by Russia, and this false text was about that Swedes had been there doing something they shouldn't and had been killed. And this was not true. This woman say, I don't know any Swedes in Ukraine. I have no Swedish colleagues. So this was all fake. But it was used to bring together Poltava, the war in Ukraine, Sweden, in trying to give the assumption that Sweden was involved in this war and Swedes had been killed in Poltava. And this woman was used, this American-German woman, working for an NGO, I think. So it's interesting that this battle always comes back. So, but let's return to World War II and Russia's efforts to, well, distort the truth, rewrite history, use history. And of course, the battle against neo-Nazism, this always comes up. And this is an interesting article that Vladimir Putin published 5 years ago. And it's very interesting to read here. A lot of stuff in this article is quite all right history writing. It's quite good analysis in parts of it. But then stuff like this comes along. The Soviet Union, pursuing its strategic military and defensive goals, started the process of the incorporation of Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. Their accession to the USSR was implemented on a contractual basis with the consent of the elected authorities. This was in line with international and state law of that time. I do think the Baltic countries would differ in their opinion of this, and so do most of us, I would say. But this is the way you can legitimize history, what happened in the 1930s, 40s, in order to, I would say, give people the idea that these parts of Europe actually belonged to Russia. They were ours, and they were taken away from us. And of course, it's all other European nations, what happens. Had we only gone along with what Russia, the Soviet Union, was doing, World War II would never have happened. Moving on to this subject. And I'm now showing you a pretty disturbing picture of corpses found a few years later when German troops had marched in here and found these mass graves of atrocities committed a few years back. And of course, the Soviet Union denied all responsibility for this, and this was forgotten because during that period, the Soviet Union was an ally to the US, to UK, a winner of World War II, and no one really bothered to look into the truth here after the Second World War. Let's forget about this. Let's accept the Soviet version of truth, that this was atrocities made by the Germans, actually. So this was the version that the Soviet Union and Russia was sticking to up until 1990. Something happened. Suddenly, Kremlin agreed that this was done by Soviet intelligence. NKVD had actually massacred. At that time, they were talking about 15,000 casualties. Now we're talking about maybe 22,000 in different places. The message was actually that the Soviet Union was responsible for this. This was not done by the Nazis. This was something done by NKVD. And later, as late as 2010, Russian parliament condemned Stalin for the Katyn massacre. So thus far, this was generally accepted in Russia, that this was an atrocity committed by Soviet Union forces. But then something happens. In April 23, history is being rewritten. Suddenly, Russian intelligence publishes unique archival documents on Katyn, saying that, well, it was them damn Nazis after all. It was not the NKVD. We were right from the beginning. This was done by the Germans. What kind of documents do you think this was? This was evidence given by a person who was under duress and threat, and he later retracted his testament in this. So this was exposed as a fake testimony already in the 1950s, this testimony. And it has never been accepted, of course. But why doing this now? This was a campaign launched by RIA Novosti in 2023. What is the idea? Well, one of the ideas can, of course, be to reinstate the Soviet Union in all their glory, in all its glory. They didn't commit any atrocities. It was kind of a tough time, but no atrocities like this one. But there's also one other thing that comes up here, and that's Bucha. So this was also done to say that they did this back in the 1940s, staging atrocities and blaming them on Russia, and they are doing the same thing now, because as you are well aware of, Russia has never accepted that they committed the atrocities in Bucha. They are saying it's fake, it's staged, etc. So now they are combining these two things, Katyn and Bucha, and saying they are fooling us. They were trying to fool us back then, and they are also trying to fool us now, blaming it on Russia always. So, moving on, another thing one could mention, the bombing of Tallinn, March 1944. Many hundreds of Tallinn inhabitants were killed. I think 25% of the city was destroyed. Extremely tragic event that, of course, Estonia still mourns and thinks of. The Estonian Minister of Foreign Affairs did a tweet a year ago saying that the city was devastated, 300 Russian aircrafts, and their primary targets were residential districts and cultural landmarks. And it's always difficult to ascertain with certainty what is the actual goal of bombings. Is it to bomb actually the things you are actually hitting, or were you really trying to hit something else, something that is acceptable as a target in war? But in actual fact, a lot of devastating was targeting civilians and ordinary buildings, theaters, etc. So, how do the Russians respond to this, you think? By doing this. Because they have started, a few years back, they started doing debunking in the style of the European Union, saying, this is fake, all fake. Well, perhaps not all of it, but you know, in essence, this is fake. And the arguments I find are very interesting because they are using words like Estonian authorities are associating themselves with the Nazis. Goebbels comes up for some reason. And also this, that air raid was part of the Soviet troops' military operations to liberate the Baltic states from the Nazis. And I think this is a kind of liberation that the Estonians would rather have not been subjected to. And liberation comes up in a lot of propaganda from Russia that we are liberating you, we are liberating. We were liberating them now, then, and we are liberating them now as well. Like in this discussion that went on in Denmark a few months ago, Russia was accusing Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen of distorting the truth of the liberation of Bornholm. Bornholm was occupied by Sweden for 2 years, 1658 to 1660. But that's not what we're talking about. Germany invaded and occupied Bornholm, and they were driven away by Russian troops. However, the Russian troops didn't leave in 1945. They stayed a full year on. Was this an occupation, or was it just, we are liberating you, as the Russians would have it? The Russians are saying, we were here to secure your status as an independent country. This is part of liberating Denmark and liberating Bornholm. Danish Prime Minister says, well, we think of it as an occupation for a year before you left. Well, it's an ongoing discussion. I think I would side with Mette Frederiksen, but you know, you can have different opinions here. And recent developments also bring new opportunities to use propaganda and use history in the information war, like this. Coming from the press bureau of the Foreign Intelligence Service of Russia, an interesting message came here in April this year. Eurofascism, like 80 years ago, is the common enemy of Moscow and Washington. And this is because a consequence of new signals from the administration in Washington and giving the Russians an idea that maybe we could be on the same side here, side against Europe, and bringing up the concept of Eurofascism, and you know, illustrating it with cartoons like this one. And of course, Russian MFA catches on in tweets saying the same thing. It's Moscow's and Washington's common enemy, just like 80 years ago. We are united against Europe. Well, I think they said hurrah a bit early. I mean, we're not there really, that we are facing both Washington and Moscow. But they had their hopes up high back then. And of course, it's not only Russia. We saw the Chinese parade a couple of weeks ago, celebrating 80 years since World War II, bringing together different leaders, shaking hands, side by side, Xi, Putin and Kim. A show of unity. And interesting enough, no one mentions this guy. It doesn't really count, does he? He's there, but he's never mentioned. I don't know why. Maybe he's just, you know, a sidekick to Putin, or, I mean, your interpretation is as good as mine. I would also like to bring up this, the systematic destruction of cultural heritage. And we all remember the Buddha statues that were destroyed by the Taliban. And UNESCO is continuously adding numbers of cultural sites being destroyed in Ukraine. And this is something that I keep looking at and updating my presentations to be as accurate as I can, thinking that it's actually something that it's premeditated to destroy cultural heritage, to destroy history, to destroy archives and libraries in order to erase history for those countries that you are invading or trying to subjugate. Cultural genocide is an interesting concept. I won't go into any depth on that because, but I think it's an interesting idea that we need a name for the systematic destruction of traditions, values, language. And this has, of course, been done many times in history, but we have a name for it. So, to sum things up a bit, authoritarian regimes can use history as a pretext for war or other enforcing means of pressure, use history as a means to evoke patriotic sentiments in their own population, exclude parts of history that do not serve their agenda, physically attack or destroy archives, museums, libraries, or historical monuments, and rewrite or outright falsify history to make it serve their strategic, political, or security goals. And of course, revise school history textbooks to fit their agenda. And this is something we have seen in the current war that Russia is waging against Ukraine, replacing history textbooks in the occupied areas, and also supplying new history textbooks for the children in Russia, giving them Putin's and Kremlin's view on history and the present war and conflict. So I would argue that the use and abuse of history is part of Russia's information war. This is something that is used constantly together with other means, other methods in the information war. And I will try to give you just a quick overview of some of the other things that we are dealing with right now. So, mirror websites to circumvent EU sanctions. You know, the European Union sanctioned RT and Sputnik in March 2022. And for a period, this halted the Russian propaganda because you can no longer see RT on your TV channels, you could not see it on Twitter, you could not see it on your Facebook or whatever. Your website was closed, stopped if you didn't use a VPN, of course. But Russia has been very creative and inventive in circumventing these sanctions, such as this, using a site called Swenter.site. What is Swenter? Any idea? If you turn Swenter backwards, what does it say? RT News. Well, aren't they funny, those Russians? You can also do it like this. Have an RT article and reproducing it as coming from the San Francisco Telegraph. The San Francisco Telegraph, anyone heard of that one? No? Well, it doesn't really exist, does it? But it sounds like a genuine American newspaper from perhaps the 1800s, San Francisco Telegraph. Yeah, I remember that one. Very good. And here's another example. Operation Overload. I would say there are loads of these fake websites. Operation Overload is still active, and it's a concept where you email journalists, researchers, fact-checking organizations, NGOs, etc., and saying, you need to look at this. This is Russian propaganda. This is Russian disinformation, isn't it? You need to look at this. Can you debunk it? Is it true, this? And when you do this, you keep them occupied. You keep them occupied with trying to debunk false stories. And also, you run the risk of reproducing the false stories when you are debunking, because you may apply the method that you are saying, well, this is what we can see, and this is false. And by that, you are also drawing attention to the false narratives, the disinformation that Russia wants to spread. And this has been going on for a few years now, mainly targeting Ukraine. What we have seen lately also targeting Moldova. Moldova has an upcoming election, as you may know, in September 28th. And we know that Russia will target this and has targeted these elections with all the force that they can sum up now. We are trying to support Moldova as well, of course. Doppelganger, you may have heard the Operation Doppelganger, where you create duplicates of genuine news sites. Several hundred of these exist. And these two examples are from The Guardian and from Bild. And all the links here, news, opinion, sport, culture, lifestyle, are the real thing. If you click on them, you come to the genuine Guardian website. But this article is obviously false. Sending out the disinformation narrative that Bucha was staged, it's a fake atrocity. And the method here is to draw people to these sites through social media. And the other one is from Bild, and it's the same thing here. All the links are okay. This article is false. It's planted by Russia. And gaming is another domain that's being used much more frequently now. This is a game where you can fight against the French in Africa. And if you do it well, you will get support from Russia. And this is an add-on to it's a Swedish game, I think. And you could play this, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, you could play this the day before the full-scale invasion actually started. So the gaming world is something that is somewhat overlooked, I think, and it's an area that we will, need to attend to in order to actually better understand how Russia is trying to use the information sphere, different types of methods here. To be able to counter it, we need to understand and we need to see it. So, most of these efforts are, of course, aimed at making us stop supporting Ukraine. Lots of strange narratives and disinformation stories have been spread, like this one, that they are buying luxury yachts. Or maybe did Zelensky buy a vineyard in Tuscany for the money? Or perhaps this elegant house from King Charles III of the United Kingdom? Or maybe he has bought a Bugatti? This is one of the more interesting ones. It was published in February this year in connection with the German election, saying that Zelensky has bought Kirstein House, Hitler's eagle's nest. And this was brought out through a 3-minute film with AI voices explaining why Bavaria needed to sell this property. The attendance figures had gone down. You could no longer afford it. There was, staples with, visitors' attendance, and they had also a faked interview with a person from this Bavarian agency who was responsible for this property. And he was explaining to a German audience why they needed to sell it, etc., etc. It was all fake, of course. And this Bavarian agency, government agency, they made a statement that this is false, it's all fake, we haven't sold this property, it's not for sale, it will never be for sale. And this was done as a press statement, which ends up lower and lower and lower and lower on their website. And recently, Zelensky was investing in South African mines as well. And you can ask yourself, is this working in any way? Do people actually believe these stories? And I think they have been used in American debates by those who wanted to stop the support package to Ukraine that was actually decided in the spring of 2024, but it was delayed by at least 6 months, I think. And these stories, the one about the yachts, was brought up by people who wanted America to say no to this support package. And you can all understand what happens if Ukraine does not get the support Ukraine needs. This have effects for the defense of the cities, the civilian population, etc., etc. And if a reading recommendation, this is a report we published beyond Operation Doppelganger in cooperation with Lund University. It's a research report that details in great length how Russia is outsourcing their propaganda and disinformation campaign by using private PR companies who work on Kremlin's orders. Highly recommended reading. So, going back to this question, why academic history and military history museums matter? Because I think they do. I would like to quote the Swedish Museum Act. Promoting knowledge, cultural experiences, free opinion formation. And the fifth here, ensure that the museum has a decisive influence over the content of its activities. Knowledge-based, characterized by versatility and openness, contribute to research and other knowledge building. This is what goes for Swedish official museums. I think this is quite good. I'm not sure what you think, but I kind of like this. You nod your head, yeah, okay, good. And the Swedish Higher Education Act about academic freedom. Academic freedom must be promoted and protected. Research problems may be freely selected, research methodologies may be freely developed, and research results may be freely published. This is the core of how we are trying to protect academic freedom in Sweden by having it in the law. And I think this is absolutely crucial that we protect museums and academic freedom. So, one of the last ones, I think. 5 things we need to do. I hope it's 5. It could be 6. I don't know. We need to reverse the negative trend for democracy globally. And I haven't said anything about this, but as you all know, democracy has been pushed back globally. I sometimes say that democracy is under siege, and this is a great problem if you ask me. Democracies seldom or never goes to war against each other. Democracies do not use information as a weapon in peacetime because we have accountability. If you lie, you will be held accountable for it. We need to safeguard upcoming elections from foreign interference. And I mentioned Moldova. We have Swedish elections in a year. We have Armenian elections. And from what we see from elections in Europe this year, Russia has tried to interfere in all of them. We need to continue our efforts for strengthening awareness, preparedness, media literacy, and critical thinking. This is, core of everything that we do, actually. We need to use new technology to our advantage. And I'm talking about AI and large language models, of course, which are being much more frequently now used by authoritarian regimes to produce false narratives, disinformation, and other things. And we need to use this analytically. We need to develop our skills to use this to better understand what is going on. And this, I think AI will be used much more frequently. It's getting better by the minute. And we need to be aware and prepared for that. And we need to safeguard academic freedom and integrity of museums. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah. Here's the 6th one. We need to continue supporting Ukraine as long as it takes. So that was about it. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Magnus, for a very interesting talk. And it's easy to see how museums can strengthen the resilience of societies and how history can be used and misused for different purposes. I'm sure we have a bunch of questions from the audience. I'd just like to start with the questions for you, Magnus, here. Have you shown us examples where the government agencies have given propaganda from Russia, but have you seen museums act as propaganda tools as well from Russia?
I'm sure they are, because all of Russia is now controlled by the Kremlin. There is no free speech, there's no free formation of opinion, you have no free academia, you have no free museums. All government entities are being used by the Kremlin to further their strategic goals. I haven't specifically looked into museums, but that's a very interesting line of thought. I will develop that for a future speech, I think.
You're welcome back then. Do we have any questions from the audience? Yes. Can you please state your name as well for the viewers online?
Fabian Arnheim, the museum director. Thank you so much for a very, very interesting speech. I can also recall Yuri Savchuk, the War Museum in Kiev, showed me one of those school books once that the Russians are trying to replace. But here's my question. Are there any statistics on the balance between misinformation and Russian propaganda and the counter information from the European side?
Not anything that I'm aware of. I know billions of messages are being pushed out. Billions. It's enormous. It's a mass that Russia is pushing out towards us. And we have some figures in this report that I was, highlighting here, the Beyond Operation Doppelganger. It's literally billions of messages being pumped out. And we are nowhere near those figures, I can tell you. We are not doing any actual counter-propaganda in that way. That's not how we are. We are more like informing our population on how these things work, trying to inoculate our population. But I think we need to find new ways, actually. We need to think in new ways, because this is so intense, and it's threatening all of Europe's democracies right now, and we need to work together. But I have no statistic, balance, but I know it's billions of messages.
Thank you. Do you have any more questions? Yes.
Hello, my name is Johan, and I'm from the Swedish Naval Museum. My question is it your opinion that Swedish media are good at not reproducing these Russian fake news?
Yeah, basically, yes. I think Swedish media has learned a lot these 11 years now, and are now much more aware of the situation. And that is what we are striving for, to inform our public, including the media. And I would like to say that, for instance, the public service company, Sveriges Television, Swedish Television, they have an excellent verify thing going, where they are basically doing the same thing that BBC has been doing, examining false narratives like the one from this. I have a slide about the woman from an NGO saying that Swedes have been killed in Poltava. That was done by Swedish Television in actually exposing how Russia is using different narratives, different stories to distract and distort our information space. So Swedish media is on a general level well informed and doing a good job now, and as they are doing a great job, much better than, going back 10, 11 years, we were all, much less aware of what is actually going on.
Thank you. Any more questions? Yes.
My name is Yuri Savchuk. I'm Director General of the National Museum of Ukrainian History in Second World War. If I may, I want to short comment. First of all, thank you so much for your amazing presentations. Amazing, really. We Ukrainians better understand your messages and you explain the situation. I am absolutely agree that history is battlefields, and Russian propaganda very active and fake means it's our reality every day. And as example of history battlefields, I would like to mention one episode a few years ago when was 300th anniversary of Poltava. Putin wants to come to Ukraine in Poltava and make show. And Ukraine part, Ukraine history, proposed to celebrate 300 the events built our alliance with Sweden when we struggled for our independence. And it was 1 year before. And in that time, your Majesty King with family come to Kyiv, first time after 300 years. And yes, we pay attention of society, of history for this event, which was before. And we sent another message in society and history. And I remember time when me and vice director of Hermitage, Georgi Vilibachov, we waiting here online and ask this museum to lend artifacts. And every country, every site interpretate in another. This is process, and this process continue every day, every moment. It's we need to pay attention right now, and especially this ongoing war. And one proposition, sorry for one comment, sorry, is perhaps your present fantastic, and perhaps your institution, your employees can organize Zoom with our institution and presented your beautiful presentation by Zoom, by online in our museum, because our museum now playing very important role in this field. And I would like to say that Maria Zakharova, you can show many times comments, our exhibition, action and events in our museum. Thank you so much. One more thank you.
Thank you so much for your comments, and of course I'll be honored to do a Zoom presentation for your museum. Definitely. Thank you so much.
I think we have time for one or maybe two more questions. Yes.
Hi, Małgorzata Ławrowska-Fontaine from Obmin Foundation. It was really great and very inspiring. Thank you for your presentation. I have one comment and one question. My comment is that not only Russian museums were used for propaganda purposes, but also Ukrainian museums at occupied territories were used by Russian for Russian propaganda against Ukraine. It's really terrible. It's a crime, I think, but it shows the importance of museums in this conflict. And the question is, because it's for me very interesting, do you know other institutions like this, like your agency in Europe, or is unique as only Swedish phenomenon?
We are unique in the way that we do both resilience building and we do information gathering and assessment, threat assessments. In France, we have Visionum, which is a sister agency of ours. They are very good at analysis. They do not so much of information spreading and they do analysis, but they do not have lectures and courses and such. So we are collaborating with different entities all over Europe. But as far as I know, there is no other agency exactly like us. This is why I think it's a strength that we are an open agency. We're not an intelligence agency. We do only open source intelligence gathering. And that's why we can also spread all the things that we are finding, all our findings. We can have very open courses, etc. So that's, I think, is an advantage, actually.
Thank you. I think we have room for one more question if there's any.
Wow.
No, thank you very much, Magnus.
Thank you.
An applaud, please.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's now time for our second keynote speaker, and it's Director Maria Smorževskihh-Smirnova from the Narva Museum in Estonia.
Thank you.
And we will be giving a presentation about hybrid wars at the border of Russia. Thank you, Maria.
Thank you. Dear colleagues, thank you very much for the invitation and for the opportunity to speak at this conference. I'm really happy to be here with you today. And actually, my topic will continue the earlier presentation, and I will read my text. At first, the Army Museum has been one of my favorite places in Stockholm since I first visited it in 2010. Many years ago, the topic of my doctoral dissertation brought me to this museum. I was studying Russian church art during the period of the Great Northern War, which in the early 18th century reflected the official ideology of conquest and the imperial ambitions of Russian Tsar Peter I, or Peter the Great. Through the Northern War, the process of ideological construction in Russia was inseparable from the process of military expansion. I was interested in how, in the early 18th century, the Orthodox Church shaped attitudes toward Russia's conquest of Hungary, Estonia, and Livonia during the Great Northern War. For me, it was a very fascinating study, and the topic turned out to be incredibly multifaceted. I analyzed both verbal and visual narratives, as well as the beautiful allegories and symbols infused with the aesthetic of Baroque. Peter I borrowed heavily from European culture, transferring ready-made European models into all spheres of official culture. Sweden was no exception. Nor was Charles XII, who was not only Peter's opponent, whom he studied closely, but also a model to emulate. This included forms of military propaganda, from leaflets to commemorative medals and battle engravings and paintings. I'd like to show you one of the early 18th century paintings based on the Battle of Narva in 1700. If you look at the background, you can see the fortresses of Narva and Ivangorod, along with Russian and Swedish soldiers engaged in battle. One detail that stands out is the Russian flag. It's just about to fall from the hands of Russian troops to the feet of the Swedes, symbolizing defeat. But the most interesting part on this painting is in the foreground. On the horseback, we see the Swedish king, Charles XII, and kneeling in front of him is a Russian soldier. If you look closely at his face, you will notice a striking resemblance to Peter the Great. Of course, we know that Peter and Charles never actually met on the battlefield, but here the image of a Russian Tsar kneeling before his enemy creates a powerful and very deliberate visual message. It's one of the artistic interpretations of Russia's defeat at Narva, and it shows how even historical events were shaped and retold through art and symbolism today, we would say that this is an example of war propaganda. At that time, it was an integral part of military triumph. But Peter I really outdid his neighbors. He didn't just manage the message of victory, take personal control over what stories were told and how they spread. He personally shaped it on every level of official Russian culture. Over time, the mechanisms and forms of this multi-layered system were lost and forgotten, and the language of that era, with its symbols, allegories, and emblems, also fell out of use. And 300 years later, even the Battle of Narva eventually turned into a popular festival, into an entertainment event. Since the early 2000s, this festival has been held in Narva every year. The festival includes reenactments of 2 Narva battles that happened here during the Great Northern War. One in 1700, the other one in 1704. The festival's visitors came from Estonia and other countries to see Narva battle. The event had 2 parts. In November, the Swedish king Charles XII was the winner, and in August it was Peter the Great's turn to shine. Good balance. Both Peter and Charles got their victory. No drama, just good entertainment for the public. When the COVID pandemic began, the festival had to be put on hold, and we actually managed to organize the festival in November 2021, and these pictures from this event in 2021. But in 2022, after the all-out war in Ukraine started, we made the decision to stop this festival, this time for ethical reasons. Since then, Russian political rhetoric has started reusing ideas and language that sound like they were taken straight from the time of the Great Northern War. For example, the return of historical Russian lands, talk of military conquest as liberation, and claims that Russians are people especially chosen by God. These kinds of messages were already part of Russia's propaganda back in Peter I's time, and now they have returned in many of Vladimir Putin's official speeches and texts. Let me share one of his statements as an example. It's about Narva. Peter the Great waged the Northern War for 21 years. It seemed he was at war with Sweden, trying to seize something. He was not seizing anything. He was returning. This relates to Narva, to his early campaigns. He was returning and strengthening. This is what he did. Apparently, it's also our fate to be returned and strengthened. This is one of many examples where the rhetoric and patterns of past imperial conquests are being produced onto Russia's current imperial ambitions. Narva is mentioned here, of course, not by chance. Today, Narva is a border city of the European Union and the easternmost city in Estonia, separated from Russia by only 101 meters. 101 meters. The state border runs through the center of Narva River, and from different observation platforms in Narva you can see Estonia and Russia and its fortresses at the same time. The border checkpoints are on both sides of the same bridge. It's called the Friendship Bridge from the Soviet times. And the Estonian one is in Narva, and the Russian border checkpoint one is Ivangorod side. Today, Russia is doing everything it can to show both the people of Narva and the rest of the world that Russia's borders never end. These words, Russia's borders don't end anywhere, were once said by Putin. They have been quoted many times, and in December 2023 appeared on a large banner in Ivangorod, here in the picture, in the Russian border city, right across from Narva castle, here. It's so close. And the banner on the Russian border with Estonia appeared shortly after Finland closed its borders with Russia. In this photo, we see a long line of trucks waiting for border control, and you see Putin with Russian flag and these words about borders of Russia. 4 years ago, before the start of the full-scale war in Ukraine, Narva was searching for a new slogan. And out of several options, including a public vote, this one was chosen. Europe starts here. This slogan highlighted the city's borderland status and its place within the European space and European history. There was also a certain focus on Russian tourists. For them, Europe started in Narva. Right now, Estonia is closed to Russian tourists. Only people with close relatives can cross the border. And Russia also shut down transport traffic through the Narva crossing, saying they need to do repair work at the checkpoint. And right now, Estonia is working on improving security at its transport terminal. This picture was made from our castle and from Narva Museum. But let's look a few historical facts about Narva. Narva officially became part of the European community nearly 680 years ago. In 1345, Narva was granted a Lubeck law, which confirmed its place within the European legal and cultural space. The second key moment came in 1585, right after the Livonian War, when the Swedish king granted Narva Swedish town rights and a new coat of arms, the same one the city still uses today. As a result of the Great Northern War in early 18th century, Narva, like the rest of Estonia, became part of the Russian Empire. And after capturing Narva, Peter I ordered the deportation of its Swedish population. Many were sent to Moscow, others as far as Siberia. And Narva and Estonia was part of the Russian Empire until its collapse in 1917. In February 1918, Estonia declared its independence. The young republic had to fight for its freedom during the War of Independence in 1918-1920, which it won. Soviet Russia officially recognized Estonia's independence in a peace treaty that also defined the eastern borders of Estonia. At that time, Estonia was larger than it's today, including Ivangorod and the lands beyond. But in 1939, after the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, Soviet military bases were placed on Estonian soil, and in 1940, Estonia was occupied and annexed by Soviet Union. During the occupation, the Soviet regime committed numerous crimes: arrests and executions of intellectuals, deportations of Estonian inhabitants to Siberia. World War II brought massive destruction to Estonia in 1941, when the German army was advancing, and most severely in 1944, when the cities were subjected to bombings by Soviet aircraft. But not only Tallinn. Narva suffered the most. Architectural and cultural heritage suffered the most during these March bombings. And beautiful 17th century old town, often called the pearl of Swedish era, was lost. War always brings destruction. This is a fact. However, in the case of Narva, the Soviet Union began spreading a propaganda narrative claiming that the city and its architectural heritage, cultural heritage, was destroyed by German troops. In 1945, the Soviet authorities took many photographs to document the scale of the destruction of Narva. A photo album was even prepared with captions in 3 languages to present the destruction of Narva as a Nazi crime, war crime. At the Nuremberg trials, they also calculated the material damage of Narva, as they hoped to receive reparations for the destruction of Narva. The fact of cities' bombings by Soviets was completely erased from the history. The Soviet authorities called the capture of Narva the liberation, and commemorative events, publications, and souvenirs helped create a narrative of liberation. But in reality, in 1944, Nazi occupation was simply replaced by Soviet occupation. Witnesses of the Soviet regime and those who tried to resist were sent to camps for political prisoners. Such a camp operated in Narva till 1955. But after the war, there were plans to rebuild Narva's historic cityscape, but only a few buildings were restored, including Narva Castle. Pre-war Narva, historical Narva, once rich with grand churches and European-style houses, was lost. The standard Soviet apartment blocks built in Narva after the war, you see in picture, completely changed the city's appearance. Narva's identity and its inhabitants were also radically transformed. Before the war, about 70% of the city's residents were Estonians. After the Second World War, people from all over the Soviet Union were brought to the destroyed city, first to rebuild its industry and factories, and later to construct housing. Narva inhabitants today are descended from these arrivals. Very few of Narva's pre-war residents were able to return. Over time, the true story of what the city lived through during the years of the Estonian Republic and World War II was quietly erased. Today, we see a similar situation in the Russian-occupied territories of Ukraine, for example, in Mariupol, where after the city was destroyed, the Russian occupation authorities began to destroy memory and identity. Today's Russia, just like centuries ago, brings not only brutal military invasion and commits war crimes, it also wages a full-scale hybrid and informational war. The language of this war is much more primitive than it was 300 years ago, but its means and of spreading and the power of its influence are more aggressive and more effective. Since Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine began, Narva and Narva Museum has found itself on the front line of hybrid and informational warfare. When we talk about war, we often imagine a front line, something with clear geographical borders. A front line exists only during wartime, and it separates the opposing sides. And in this war, there is no clear front line. It's invisible and shifting. The weapons don't always look like weapons, and the damage comes slowly, and often we don't even notice it at first. The tools of Russian hybrid war are diverse. For example, spy devices equipped with photo and video technology, they look like a blimp. Russia launches them from the Ivangorod area, and they slowly move along the river for several days. Since Narva is so close, it feels as if the blimp is hovering right above you. I took this photo with my phone from the museum's territory. This is the roof of our administrative building, and the whole city can see it, and it creates stress and sense of danger. Or, for example, last year, Russian border guards illegally cut and removed the border buoys from the middle of Narva River, and they did it at night. This was covered in the press, but the Estonian border guard did not escalate the situation. We also face problems with mobile communication and GPS. But the biggest and most dangerous part of hybrid war takes place in the informational space. This information influence has its own audience. A huge number of Narva inhabitants are immersed in the Russian informational space. Let's take a look at the statistics. Narva inhabitants, 53,000 people, of which 96% are Russian speakers, 34% are Russian citizens, 13% do not have any citizenship, but they have a special pass and they could travel without any special visa to Russia and to Europe. They live in Narva. But not only in Narva, actually in Estonia as well. And 50% are Estonian citizens, but 96% Narva inhabitants are Russian speakers. At the very beginning of the war, the broadcasting of Russian TV channels was officially banned in Estonia. However, Narva continued to watch these channels without any special equipment. Since the city is so close to the border, a simple antenna is enough to receive Russian television, and even now it can be watched freely and in full. It's important to understand that this is not only a problem of Narva. It affects other regions too, not only in Estonia, but also in other countries where Russian-speaking communities live. Russia is trying to influence them through all possible information channels. And for example, even that Facebook is officially banned in Russia. But you know, many Russian propaganda platforms still have their own Facebook pages and accounts. The main narratives pushed by these propaganda channels are: Russia is a country of true values. Russia always stands for peace. Russia is standing up to global evil, the collective West. We are the global evil. Russia has never initiated a war. Russia has never committed war crimes. Russia has fought and continues to fight fascism. The topic of World War II plays a major role in shaping this ideology. The cult of war, based on the idea of a great Russian victory in World War II, has been actively developing in Russia over the last 20 years. A few words about the cult of war. It grew out of the cult of victory and has been actively developing over the past 20 years. Of course, this was a complex and gradual process, from parades and military ceremonies, which grew bigger and bigger every year, to children dressed in Red Army uniforms. Some of these children were even posed as sentinels in front of war memorials. For example, this picture was made in Tallinn in 2017. War memorials themselves became places not of mourning, but of pride. The tragedy of war was replaced by its ceremonial display, and the key lessons of World War II, like never again, were forgotten. In their place came new slogans and attitudes. We can do it again, and to Berlin. The cult of victory gradually turned into a kind of quasi-religion, complete with its own rituals. For example, the immortal regiment marches. War itself has been transformed from a tragedy into a noble, even sacred mission. And it was precisely this cult of war that mentally prepared Russian society and Russian speakers for the invasion of Ukraine. War came to be seen as something normal, even necessary. This entire complex of quasi-cultural phenomena and narratives has been gradually introduced not only into the daily life of Russian citizens. In true Soviet propaganda tradition, it has also been systematically promoted in neighboring countries, especially among Russian-speaking populations, both still engaged in Russia's cultural and informational space. War monuments erected in Estonia during the Soviet occupation have also become tools used by Russia to manipulate the emotions of Estonians' Russian-speaking population. That's why in 2022, Estonia made the decision to relocate certain Soviet-era war monuments to the military museum to Tallinn and to dismantle some of them. These were monuments dedicated to the so-called Great Patriotic War, the name used in Russia for the Soviet-German war conflict of 1941-1945, and they often featured Soviet symbols. One of such monuments in Narva was a tank, mounted on a pedestal near Narva River, installed in 1970. Despite its appearance, this tank never saw combat. It was actually assembled from various parts after the war during the Brezhnev era. But over time, myths began to form around this tank. For example, the belief that it was the very one of that liberated Narva in 1944. Certain rituals also developed. Up until it was removed, brides and grooms would visit the tank as part of their wedding ceremonies and wedding celebrations. In 2022, in the days leading up to the monument removals, people began keeping watch over them day and night, especially Narva tank, guarding its if it were something sacred, like altarpiece. On August 16 in 2022, this tank was transported to Tallinn, and several other monuments were dismantled. The empty spots, like here, were where the monuments once stood, became a kind of altar. People kept vigil there around the clock, lit candles, and brought flowers. And not only flowers, children as well were there. As expected, the removal of the monuments triggered a strong negative reaction in Narva. Outrage quickly spread across local social media and was amplified by Russian information channels. 2 of these monuments were removed and destroyed from the territory of our museum. One of them, a Soviet-era plaque, was replaced with a more neutral inscription to those who fell in World War II. It was a mass grave in Narva. It's important to note that these monuments had been under close watch by Russian diplomats in Estonia and the Russian consulate in Narva for many, many years. And nearly 3 years after the monuments were dismantled, these places are still very much alive. For example, here, this photo taken on May 9 of this year, and Russia responded to the actions of the Estonian government. 3 weeks after the tank was removed, an exact replica of the Narva tank was installed in Ivangorod. Many Narva residents attended the unveiling ceremony. Those who could not cross the border came to the northern courtyard of Narva Museum, of Narva Castle, brought binoculars and watched the tanks unveiling from the wall of Narva Castle. The new tank is installed on a hill in Ivangorod, and just like the dismantled original, its gun barrel is pointed toward Estonia. But the story of the Narva tank did not end there. Earlier this year, the animated film was shown at a Russian film festival, featuring a small tank as the main character. It's here. In the film's storyline, the little tank dreams of taking part in the victory parade in Moscow, in Red Square. But because of its small size, it's not allowed to go. And eventually, when it grows up, it's placed on a pedestal in one of the cities in Russia. At some point, the tank hears that a similar tank has been taken down from its pedestal in Narva. So it decided to go to Narva to fire its cannon, to take revenge for its big brother. This cartoon has been enthusiastically discussed on social media in Narva. For 3 years in a row, The cult of war and the manipulation of identity in the name of the great history of the Russian people have turned into mass propaganda event. On May 9th, when we host the celebration of Europe Day, on the opposite bank of Narva River, Russia has organized a huge propaganda event dedicated to Victory Day in the World War II. Big screens show the parade, concerts and Putin's speeches from Moscow, from Red Square, all of which actually glorify Russia's military intervention in Ukraine. This propaganda event is aimed at Narva inhabitants, awakening them a sense of belonging to greatness and a history of victors. Great victory, great history, great empire. The residents of Narva watch this concert from the Estonian side as the stages and screens are facing the Estonian side. All day, the screens are filled with Soviet-era war movies, reinforcing the narrative of military glory. At the end of the day, a big fireworks show. With each passing year, the scale of this event grows. The concert's visual design heavily emphasizes the message that victory will be ours. It also sends a clear symbolic message that there is no real difference between Ivangorod and Narva. According to this narrative, we share the same history and even the same river and sky. It's a powerful attempt to erase borders, not just geographic but also historical and emotional borders. For us, staying silent in this situation would mean either ignoring it or accepting it. Culture has no right to remain neutral or in the face of evil or to ignore war. That's why, for the third year in a row, on this day, Narva Museum hangs a banner, seen here on the slide, on the wall of Narva Castle with this picture, Putin is a war criminal. This year, it was Putler, war criminal. Our banner is clearly visible to the opposite side, in Ivangorod. This is a reminder of the full-scale war happening today in Ukraine and of the war crimes committed by Russia today. Since Russian propaganda explains the war in Ukraine as a war against fascism and wrong values, we as a museum consider it necessary to talk about the dramatic consequences of this war. Of course, we receive a huge number of responses, and they always come from two completely opposite directions. On one side, negativity and threats, on the other, words of support and gratitude. This banner is the most visible and talked about part of our message, but Narva Museum has launched several projects dealing with the difficult questions of history and World War II. Because propaganda only has power when people don't know history. Last year, we organized an exhibition, Narva 44, dedicated to the bombing of Narva by Soviet aircraft in 1944, marking the 80th anniversary of this tragic event. Some more pictures from propaganda concert. This year, Narva site. Narva River bank. The exhibition was based on facts, archival materials and historical photographs, and the most residents of Narva did not like this. Actually, I had a very long and difficult conflict with local politicians, because Narva Museum is a foundation and we have a supervisory board with some representatives from local government and from Ministry of Culture, Finance Ministry of Estonia, from Estonian government, local government and Estonian government, free and free. And yes, it was a really long and very interesting conflict, because local politicians in Narva, they have their own electorate who maybe not visibly support, but who is involved in this Russian informational space and Russian historical narratives. And that time when we opened the exhibition, the administrators of Narva social media groups called for a boycott of Narva Museum. And once again, we really received many threats. In March this year, we launched a lecture series called The History of Narva to start an open dialogue with our local community. We organized 16 lectures in Russian and in Estonian languages, and our speaker was senior inspector at the Heritage Department, who talks about Narva's architecture with great professionalism and with great love. Even before these lectures began, the local social media, for example, Narva News, published a series of very aggressive articles accusing the museum of spreading propaganda and rewriting history. Despite this, each lecture was attended by 50 to 80 people. At the end, we offered an open microphone. Anyone could speak freely to create a safe space. We paused the live stream during this part. We streamed the lectures on YouTube, on our YouTube channel, but had to close the comments quickly because bots swarmed our channel. And the chat was full of accusations of historical falsification from Narva Museum. But in real life, no one confrontational showed up in lecture room. Only friendly, curious people came. However, very shortly after the final lecture, our speaker was attacked right in the city center around 6 p.m. The attacker was drunk and said he was angry because our speaker was telling the wrong version of Narva's history. Fortunately, Narva and Narva city center has many security cameras. So the police found him quickly and the case went to court and the attacker was found guilty. He had to pay compensation for the injury, and it later turned out that the attacker had never even attended the lectures. He had just seen the speaker's face on our poster and read something in social media, local social media. This is a real example of how the methods of the information war work even on a very local level in a small border city in Narva. And I'd like to share a less dramatic example that rather illustrates the cultural level of modern Russia. At the beginning of this summer, Russian social media channels spread a claim that on Pushkin's birthday, a rude message was projected onto Narva Castle's tower from Ivangorod, saying Estonia would not succeed in banning the Russian language. It was supposedly aimed at the Estonian government, but if its reality existed, only Russians with insomnia would see it. And many asked me about it and believed it. In fact, it was a fake video, filmed during the day and then darknet. Such a precise projection from Ivangorod to it is just impossible. Our castle wall, which was decorated with flags at that time, is brightly illuminated. It's brightly illuminated during nights and evenings and mornings. This was a fake meant to deceive people. And to finish, I want to share something very personal with you. This year, Estonian journalist told me that a Russian court in Moscow, Basmanny court in Moscow, issued an arrest warrant against me in absentia, accusing me of spreading false information about the Russian army. Then, this summer, they found out there is a new charge against me because of banners with Putin. Russia accuses me of rehabilitating Nazism and say I'm now on an international wanted list. I am a citizen of Estonia, and as far as I know, I'm the first director of European Museum to face these kinds of charges and be arrested in absentia by Russia. What does this tell us? It tells us that despite Russia's calls to ignore our banner and our exhibitions, they see it, they hear it, and it infuriates them that we call the war but by its real name and war criminal by war criminal. I have no intention of ever going to Russia or countries allied with it, and I will never give them chance to arrest me. But I am asking all of you today, please stand in solidarity with Ukraine. This war is not someone else's problem. It's about all of us. We must speak out about Russia's war crimes. We must never forget its imperial ambitions. If you think that the war in Ukraine is far away, that it does not concern you, that is a very dangerous illusion. If you think, yes, and we are already on the battlefield, not just battlefield of guns and tanks, but a battlefield of information, lies and manipulation, a hybrid war. And it's up to us, all of us, to stand strong, to resist and to fight for victory. Because if we stay silent now, the cost will be far greater tomorrow. Thank you very much. Yes, it's me.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Maria. Such a gripping story, and we can't even imagine how to feel like you do now. I think you and your museum are really, really brave and on the front line in this hybrid war. Thank you very much. I'm sure we have questions, and I'd like to go first again here. Have you noticed any different behaviors from your visitors since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine from Russia? Have they increased in numbers? Do they ask for different things?
No, they are silent. But I know that we have a lot of visitors from. I'm not sure that they are from Russia because today it's really not easy to have visa to Estonia. But maybe some people who have relatives in Estonia, yes, they visit us. But they don't comment at all.
Not even the inhabitants of Narva as well?
No.
Okay. And you've shown us a couple of examples of how you have changed your methods of works with displaying flags. But have you changed it in collecting objects as well?
Yes, it's very good question actually, because during last years, a lot of Ukrainians are our inhabitants in Narva. They are also inhabitants of Narva, and we organized some interviews with them. Of course, this process is not is very dramatic. It's very dramatic for our Ukrainian inhabitants, but they talk about their experience, and we are collecting these stories, because this is also about war crimes of Russia, and it's necessary to collect these stories today. But not only in Narva, we know that in Europe a lot of Ukrainian people today. And for me, our responsibility, it means museums' responsibility, especially historical museums, to collect these stories and to communicate with Ukrainian peoples, because very often I hear that it's not about history. Our banner, it's only about politics. It's about politics. No. We live in historical moment. Our conference tomorrow will be history. That's why it's about the mission of our museums, especially of Narva Museum, to talk about this, and to talk maybe not in loud voice just now. We need to reflect, but to talk, to organize lectures, to organize discussions. Okay, we organized, we have just now some bad experience, but I don't plan to stop. We will continue.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry. It's lunchtime. I will concurrent with
I'll soon release
French,
you.
yes.
Do you have any questions from the audience?
Jörg Mori from the Berlin Museum, Berlin-Karlshorst. I will give my presentation, so very much similar what you told us in Berlin. But the question, to remove the tank, the pedestrian tank, did it help? Or is there another, how can I say, commemorating place born afterwards?
Yes, it's a very good question. It's difficult to ask, but it was very necessary for Estonian community, because Narva is not Russian city, it's Estonian city, and we have our values. It's about values. It's not about just statement. Statement is very important, but values is also very important. And we know how Russia manipulates these our values with our history. That's why actually many Soviet monuments were removed and destroyed 30 years ago in 1990s. in Estonia. Narva was maybe the last city with some tank. And yes, we need to reflect this topic, but it was right. From my point of view, it was very right decision. And yes, here is some local politician who, maybe I will find his words. Yes, another politician speaking on camera at the site where the tank had stood said he believed that this tank will definitely return to Narva and will once again be welcomed by flowers and cities inhabitants. This is the answer, maybe.
Do we have any other question?
Thank you, Maria. Helene speaking here. Thank you so much. And I was just thinking, after listening to Magnus and also you, because you could also argue that with this freedom of speech and the right to your own opinion, how do we we are also challenged by that, because it also gives the right to spread messages and propaganda. So what are your reflections on that? Because it could be argued that, we are spreading propaganda here now in the opposite way. But I've been thinking a lot about this because it is a challenge for our whole democratic world, and I just would like to also comment the work of Odmin Foundation, where we had this discussion this summer in a conference about what messages are museums political or not, because that is really a difficult question. And you say also that it is. Of course, political in some way, but it is more than that. And I said then, and I also think that it's important for us and for our future discussions here, because this is not easy to choose the stories or to stand up. It also makes people afraid. But there is a difference between spreading information or propaganda in the service of democracy.
Yes. Or spreading historical narratives in propaganda.
And in the name of democracy and true facts, and if you do it on the basis of totalitarian views, that is the difference. And I think it's important to have that with you in your mind when you try to navigate in this difficult information war. Because we know marketing, it affects us. Eventually, when you have seen this shampoo, you go and buy it. Even you are not, you have seen it so many times. And it's the same thing with information. Have you heard the message 100 times? Maybe it is the truth.
Yes.
So how do you deal with this kind of problem?
Thank you. Yes, it's very challenging. I have no answers just now. I'm trying to do something because I can't be just silent in this situation, and I see how the historical topics are used in propaganda channels, in propaganda current ways. And I remember that, okay, history, it's one sphere, but we have also just values. And it's more, it's not only about history, it's about our values. War is tragedy. War is crime. We live in 21st century. How could it be? How?
Sorry, but I have to make one comment. You're totally right. We have the same in Berlin. When I acted in public and answered to the Russian propaganda about history, once we had a lecture in the museum, and a representative of the Russian embassy came to me and said, "Oh, Mr. Marie, you got a politician." No. Yes, all your interviews and so on and so on. And as I answered, if your president as politics is acting like a historian and is making politics out of history, I, as an historian, have the right to answer in a political way. And for a brief moment, there was no answer. So, for 2 seconds, my victory.
Yes.
But you're talking about values, completely right. But if the opposite is acting in this way, we have the same right to act in the other way.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I think Yuri has a question here as well.
Dearest Maria, thank you so much for your very good presentation. And you remain to support Ukraine. Magnus also remain to support Ukraine. Thank you so much for your position. Because for us, ongoing war, not only discussion in this beautiful place, in this beautiful museum, it's in this beautiful country and friendly country for us. I would like to pay attention for one very interesting episode. During this full-scale Russian invasion, 3.5 years, I give many interviews for international journalists from different of the world. It's hundred and thousand. And for example, this year, the journalist from France, before the 8th of May, the Day of Memory in Europe, asked me, Russia talk that you are Nazis, Ukrainian Nazis. Ukrainian talk that Russia Nazis, and we hear in our society, in our country, every day, and very interesting and what is true, and with this way. And I response that this question is very clear for me, because I'm in Ukraine and in Kiev, and every day my country attacked by bombs, missiles, rockets, and every day destroy life of the people. Every day killed people. It's in Ukraine, and not in the territory in Russia. We not attacked Russia, and it's very clear for us. And during this discussion, sometimes we tend to propaganda or historical narrative, true or propaganda, and so on. Some things must be very clear. We need to be very strong in our position, and it's also in fighting for democracy, for value. Many times I hear this the definition in this, and we need to do this work. We need created exhibition. We need by art to show war. We need to find dialogue with society in different way, and absolutely I support you. Conclusion that it's not politics, it's historical time right now, and we take part in this process. And 80 years, like after the Second World War, the historian researchers will be think about us, about our about our life. Thank you so much. So very emotional.
Thank you. Thank you, Maria. Thank you very much for a great presentation.
Thank you.
So it's now time to say goodbye to our online viewers. We're going to leave you here now.